Good morning, good Chodesh. Thank you all for joining us on this auspicious first day of Rosh Chodesh, second Adar. It's a Thursday, March 3rd. We're gathered to study the entire Talmud, one page, one line, 2 letters at a time, through the entire Talmud. Presently, Masechet Shabbat, chapter 13, page 106a. We were talking yesterday first about mourning and the virtue of mourning those who warrant our sadness, and we also talked about other related topics, and then we transitioned onward to talk about if it is prohibited or permitted. Just hit mute all. Please feel free to unmute for comments or questions. If it is permitted on Shabbos to do an act of destruction, and if it is considered a malacha, being that by definition the malachot are meant to be constructive, would we consider destructive activities prohibited or not? And there's a little bit of a dialogue that we'll pick up in a moment about possibly giving a waiver, not a waiver to be exempt, a waiver from exemption to be chayiv if a person does an injury that's mikalkel, chovel that's mikalkel, and fire burning, which is mikalkel. And that's going to be the discussion we're going to pick up. First, I want to dedicate our learning for the well-being, health, happiness, gezunt of our dear members of our chabura, those that are in front of the screen, those that are behind the screen. I want to mention to dear friends that we continue to daven for complete, speedy recovery, Leah Basrita and Malka Basrivka, as well as all the other, again, dear, wonderful folks on our chabura. We're also mentioning today the father of Reb Gabriel Naiman, who's the Gabbai in Shul here, or one of the Gabbais, I should say, and he finished Shiva today for his father, Kalman Yitzchak and Mordechai, and we'll dedicate our learning as well for him. Reb Beryl, you're muted. Please unmute. We'd love to hear your voice.
Thinking, is there a connection to this, what we call destruction, etc., to the fact that the Mishkan was taken apart and put together and then carried?
Good question, but just a fast answer, which might not be the full answer, is the Mishkan was never destroyed. It was disassembled. And we need to, and I'm glad you may ask the question so we could distinguish between destruction and disassembling something. I don't suppose we would consider them to be perfectly correlated, but keep the thought. It's a good thing that we're going to have to consider, maybe we did before, but more in the realm of bona and soter, constructing and deconstructing. So it's not a terrible idea, but in the using the word mikalkel doesn't apply to strategically following the instructions and disassembling. But again, soter possibly. So hold the thought, and Yashikayach for asking that. Again, we'll also mention some of a lot of dedications, but we're praying for continued good news from the Jews of Ukraine, those that are stuck in the cities in underground, and those that are trying to escape, and those that have already escaped. And we should also be mindful that, unfortunately, our sympathy, of course, to those in Ukraine, but we have to consider that the innocent folks in Russia are about to have a very rough economic time, and we pray that it doesn't, anyways, we have to pray for all innocent folks should be blessed and provided for, and Hashem in his great, in infinite capacity and wisdom, will hopefully help our world find blessings that we so desperately and urgently need. But for now, we're going to do our part by studying another dose of Talmud. So I'm going to share the screen and let's begin. So the Mishnah, hold on, let me see if I could get it to our preferred line. Yeah. So the Mishnah has a line that says, V'chol hamikalkalin piturim, all acts of destruction, of ruining, of breaking are patur. It's not considered a malacha on Shabbos. There is a conflicting brisa that's introduced to us by Rabbi Abahu. Tani Rabbi Abahu. Rabbi Abahu taught a brisa. Kamed Rabbi Yochanan, in the presence of Rabbi Yochanan, that says, and again, we read this yesterday, I'm just giving a fast recap. Kol hamikalkalin, when a person does a destructive act on Shabbos, piturim, one is always exempt from biblical destruction, chutz michoyvel u'maver, with the exception. A person who is choyvel, who inflicts a wound, person who's maver, who lights a fire, although wounding is destructive. Burning typically is destructive. They are considered a malacha. That's what the Brisa says. After Rabbi Yochanan hears this Brisa, he tells him, throw this Brisa out. This does not reflect the halachic perspective. Amar lei, puk, tane lebara. Go teach your Brisa somewhere else. You know why? Choivel umavir einoi mishnah. What you're saying about choivel and mavir, this should not be taught. It is not consistent with the halachic perspective that we have regarding which we have a tradition. Wow, that's a strong statement. This is an unverified, unconfirmed brisa. They might call it fake news. That is what Rabbi Yochanan's assertion is. This teaching that you said, Chayvel, Mavir would be biblical malachis, that is not reflective of our taught tradition. Now maybe you'll tell me, yeah, actually this has been taught. Maybe it is a legitimate teaching, but only in a very, very restricted and limited way. There is a scenario where a person could inflict a wound, and the wound would yet be constructive. When you're trying to draw the blood for a constructive purpose. Can anyone think of a more modern way that we might say that choivel is constructive? Somebody help me out over here. Blood, something about blood.
Medicine. If you do surgery, for instance.
Oh, so if you do something that is surgical, yeah, but I'm thinking about something that is more accessible to the masses, and what I'm talking about is donating blood. To donate blood, when I lived in New York, there was always the Jewish community always arranged the blood drives. They had mobile blood drives, and I would love to donate blood. It's a way to help. Doesn't cost anything. Maybe it's even good for your health. And so I imagine probably this would be the same kind of chayvel. In those days, they didn't really have much use for blood besides for to feed a bloodthirsty dog. But again, today we would also insert, what do you call it? The needle or whatever, making a wound for the purpose of extracting constructive blood. The blood can be used in medical procedures for folks that need blood, out on the platelets or the red blood cells or whatever else is needed. There's also, if I understand correctly, some value to the blood, meaning the blood banks, sometimes they do it altruistically, but sometimes it's sold. And so that would be a modern choivel that's constructive, I believe. And mavir b'tzorech le'afar. And similarly, if you burn a fire, you make a fire, but the point is you're hoping to have the pechem, the ash, the char that remains, which can be used for pigment, for painting, for writing, for safrut, for scribes. And so if you do it in such a manner, that would be considered constructive. As a matter of fact, not so long ago, we read the Rambam, who describes the method of having ink for a Sefer Torah, Tefillin, and Mezuzot. And if I recall correctly, he describes how they would collect the ashes. And so if you do it in a way that you intend to have the ashes, that would be considered possibly constructive. All right, let's see how the Gemara continues. The Gemara says, hold on a second. We know that Rabbi Yochanan rejected this, but how does this work at all? How does Rabbi Abahu maintain the position that you could be chayiv for burning a fire, for being destructive? How could you ever be chayiv? The Mishnah says, without any hesitation, kol hamekalkalin peturim, all forms of damage, destruction is pater. So the Gemara is going to give a familiar answer. You know what Rabbi Abahu would say? two different Mishnaic opinions. Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon. Masnisin. Just highlighting so you can see where we're holding. Masnisin, Rabbi Yehuda. The Mishnah, which says Hakol, Kol, Mekalkalim Pturim. This reflects the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, who says, what does he say? The Islay Mekalkal Bechabura Pater, he believes that when you make an injury, a wound, you're Pater. V'lo yispar sheikha. Okay, well, I'll hold out of the scholarship for a moment. Let's just read it. Masnisan Rabbi Yehuda. Our Mishnah that says Hakol Pturim, this reflects the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. Braisa that says you're Chayiv, Rabbi Shimon. This is the opinion of Rabbi Shimon. How does that work? Here's why. My time at Rabbi Shimon. Why does Rabbi Shimon say that you are Pater? I'm sorry, why does he say that you are Chayiv for fire, burning, and harming? So here we got to do a little bit of lumnus. A pasuk is necessary to teach us that on Shabbos you do a bris, even though necessarily part of the circumcision process is chayvel, harming, drawing blood. What pasuk tells us that you do a bris even on Shabbos? It says, "Uvayoyim hashmini yimol besar arlaton." Parshas Tazria. It says, on the 8th day, circumcise your son. V'yoyim yisera. It doesn't need to say v'yoyim, but it's there to teach us ve'afilu b'Shabbos. Even on Shabbos you do bris. And indeed, you may have wondered, although it's not common yet in our shul, we don't have that many brisins, so we haven't really had any Shabbos. We have not had a Shabbos bris. Actually, we have, but they've been in a home nearby. But anyways, on Shabbos, you're allowed to do a circumcision, although typically that very act, if it was not a mitzvah, would be prohibited. Umila chayvelhu, circumcising also can be considered a wound. Michlal, dishar, mekalkal, and bechabura chayiv. If the Torah has to tell us, you may circumcise, what can we infer from here? The Torah is telling us that otherwise you're not allowed to make a wound. If the Torah believed that you're never chayiv for making a wound, help me. I hope you'll indulge me. Let's think this through. If the Torah said chovel, injuring, wounding is not a malacha, would the Torah need to teach us that you could do a bris? Of course you could do a bris, because the Torah would have the position that you can always injure. So from the fact that the Torah decides to expend extra words to positively teach us that one may do a bris, from here we infer that all other forms of chayvel are prohibited. Ha-chayvel ba'alma chayiv. Let's read Rashi. Brisa Rabbi Shimoni, the Brisa which says you're chayiv for injuring. He says generally, if the malacha is not for its primary purpose, you're pater. There's never going to be an injury or destruction that's not destructive. And even though maybe you're burning wood in order to cook, so you'll say, hold on, I'll tell you how fire is constructive, because cooking is constructive. So he says, cooking is a problem, but you're looking now at the fire, that's considered mekalkel. Rabbi Shimon says, I don't consider the constructive contribution of the burning wood to be an additional malacha, because it's a malacha she'eina tzricha legufei. It's not a malacha that is contributes in the very act. This is an interesting Rashi. I don't want to dwell on it, but I just want to point out, as you may recall, there were varying definitions of malacha she'eina tzricha legufa, and here Rashi strikes his unique take on malacha she'eina tzricha legufa, which is more literal. The act of burning is causing the thing to turn to ash. That is the literal event. just because it allows the fire to endure, well, that's something else. So he says the reason why you're chayiv when you harm and you burn is because the Torah explicitly negates and or actually re-engages and considers them to be malachas. And now, why does Rabbi Shimon say that the Brisa says that burning is a malacha? From the fact that the Torah says that you're not allowed to kindle a fire in a certain scenario where the capital punishment is affected. From here, we infer that you are generally prohibited from lighting a fire, even when there's a mitzvah involved. So Rabbi Shimon has two psukim that tell us that which generally indicate you're not allowed to injure, with a rare exception. You're never allowed to burn a fire, even for a mitzvah. And therefore, Rabbi Shimon says, from here we see that there is a malacha called chayvel, and there is a malacha called mavir, called burning. So the Gemara says, hold on, and why does Rabbi Yehuda say you're potter? Rabbi Yehuda says, you know what? When our Mishnah says mikalkalin pturim, obviously we're not including burning. That's constructive. Again, Rabbi Yehuda, hasam misakinu. In the act of circumcision, you are not harming at all. You're being constructive. That's not considered mechanical damaging, destruction. But if you're just doing something destructive, of course you're chai. Let's think about this. Please unmute yourself if you would like to. You'd be willing to share or engage over here. Let's think about this. Circumcision. And Dr. Stamler, I suppose we'd say a similar thing about surgery. Destructive or constructive? You're muted.
Depends on the result.
It's destructive in order to become constructive.
So you're saying the surgeon is making an incision or pulling out a tooth or whatever else. It's destructive, but it's actually constructive. The very act is all part of facilitating, hopefully, wellness, healing, etc. So Rabbi Shimon says, don't confuse me with the facts. Snapshot. Take a picture. There's a knife, cutting, there's blood. Malacha, I don't care about the narrative. It looks like a wound. The Torah says you're only allowed to do a wound. I'm sorry, I should go. So bris is the same thing. What is the bris? For a Jew, there's nothing more wonderful than having the gift or giving their child the gift of a physical testament to the deep bond that a Jew has with their creator, with their God. A bris is an essential mitzvah for a Jew to have. Ideally, it's done at 8 days old, except for folks that lived in regions or times or places where it wasn't possible, and many people had a bris at a much later age, which is a much greater degree of devotion and sacrifice. So we'll say, Rabbi Yehuda will say, this is constructive. Of course, the Torah is going to permit that, but that does not mean that all of a sudden we're going to give a general waiver to injuring, which is generally considered to be destructive. I, on my own, which means that I may be wrong, am inferring that we would say the same thing about surgery, according to Rabbi Yehuda. Granted, surgery, I'm not saying that you'd be allowed to do surgery on Shabbos. I'm not saying you can or can't, but that we would consider surgery to be creative, constructive, and not mikalkel. A surgery facilitates, with Hashem's help, with a good doctor, with the right doctor, healing, wellness, correction, or whatever, and therefore we would consider that mitake. If it is allowed to be done on Shabbos is another question. Generally, electives should not be done on Shabbos. But of course, pikuach nefesh tocha kol haTorah. So if there's a pikuach nefesh, of course, one would be allowed to do surgery on Shabbos. So back to our Gemara. Rabbi Yehuda says, hold on. Our Mishnah says, Pturim. If the act that you're doing is mekalkel, you're putter. Sometimes the act is not mekalkel at all. Sometimes it's misakin. For example, a circumcision. Kid Rav Ashi, Damar Rav Ashi, mali lesakin mila, mali lesakin kli. You know, sometimes to make a dish, to make a vessel, to make a cup, to make a bowl, you need to whittle away at it. You're removing mass. You're tearing, uprooting wood. Is that constructive or destructive? Well, if you're forming, designing, creating, fashioning a vessel, that's constructive. And the same thing Rav Ashi says is a circumcision. Although, in fact, some biological material is being removed, but this is all in creating a mitzvah and, in a sense, upgrading a Jewish male. Mali levashel psila, mali levashel semanim. And similarly, cooking, burning a wick in the creation of ash is not very different than using heat to cook pigment or other stuff. Rashi, shumadlik psila shelavar. So basically, long story short, Rabbi Yehuda says that when our Mishnah is able to unequivocally state that mekalkel is pater, you're telling me burning? That's not mekalkel. That's ultimately constructive. As a matter of fact, when a society runs out of fuel, God forbid, they're in grave trouble. When a society runs out of, and the medical procedures are essential, that's not mekalkel. So our Mishnah can honestly say mekalkel, damaging, pater. That's not to say that you'd be off the hook for constructive acts like mitaken. Hello, sir. How are you? And this concludes our little section over here. So again, maybe this Gemara was a little bit confusing, but I think this is a very interesting exercise to consider either what you see in the moment or what's behind it. Before we continue the next Gemara, I want to actually share with you an excerpt from last night's JLI meditation from Sinai, which makes the case that there are certain meditative practices that are part of ancient Jewish practice and rituals. And here's what we shared. And for some of you, especially the more philosophically oriented, this is going to be a no-brainer and obvious. But we described that just as a human being has a body and a soul, the body is what contains the soul, but what interacts, what's creative, what's emotional, what's deep, what's rich, what's alive is the soul, giving a body life. Well, similarly, in everything in the world, every event, every moment, every interaction, every story, every picture has the technical component and then the purpose behind it. And so, for example, we said two people go out for dinner. Let's say they're in a courting stage of life. So you see a picture, a snapshot, a moment of you'll see two people sitting across with dishes. What do you see? Well, the body of it is two primates stuffing food into their mouth, which is very uninspiring. The soul of the event is not just two primates eating, but a ritual act of courtship, two people getting to know each other, enjoying quality time, and the culinary excellence of the establishment. And so there's the body and the soul. Same thing you might say about a handshake. You see two people shaking hands. What's going on over here? Well, two primates holding each other's hands, not very significant. But if you know that there's actually a business deal going down and each party is giving their word, and in accordance to their societal norm, the handshake represents the assurance of each party to the other that they're going to adhere to their side of the deal. Well, that's a very rich and meaningful event.
Halavai, we see a handshake between Russia and Ukraine.
Amen. Or I don't know. The professor says it's too late for a handshake. There needs to be another resolution. But so the bottom line is that everything has a body and a soul. The same thing, one last example, of painting. You look at a painting. And so last night we showed a picture. I love the picture. It's a beautiful picture of a father with his children around the Hanukkah menorah, and he's bending down and lighting the menorah. So you ask, what do you look at? Well, it's a painting. What is the painting? Well, either it's a series of brush strokes splashing pigment on a white piece of canvas, or a bunch of pixels, not very meaningful or inspiring or purposeful. Or you see the picture with all of the soul that it conveys and the perspective of the artist with the human imperfection that's imbued on this canvas, and there's something very rich and beautiful. And so you always have two components. You have the cold, hard, technical snapshot of the moment, and then you have the rich, deep depth of the event. And so the same thing our Gemara is challenging us here. Do we just look at the fact that circumcision is a metal implement cutting off flesh of a human being? Blood is, or do we look at the beauty of a young Jewish child being inducted into a ritual that has been done for his people for over 3,000 years, declaring a deep, abiding connection to their God that's even beyond our rational capacity. Anyway, so that's the point, and that's what this Gemara states. And indeed, Rabbi Yehuda says we would never consider one of those acts to be mekal kel. They are mitaken. Rabbi Shimon says no, because we always can only see we look at in a more technical perspective, and then we need a special pasuk to give us a waiver to tell us that you are allowed to do circumcision because otherwise chayvel is prohibited, etc., etc. So, anyways, a little bit of a thought exercise that our Gemara invited us to entertain, and that concludes this little segment of the Gemara. Any thoughts or comments before we go on to the next 3 lines and then finish this mission and then embark on the next mission? All right, so let's continue. If someone's trying to say something, I don't hear you, you're muted, so you're welcome to unmute, but otherwise, we'll continue. Shiur HaMelabin. The Mishnah says that for a bunch of acts, so for example, we said Shiur, actually, hold on, let me pull up the text so we can witness it in its fullness. Mishnah. No. Well, anyways, here we go. Shiur HaMelabin, the Hamenapetz Vatzoveya, the measure that a person would be liable for whitening, cleaning, combing, dyeing, and spinning. We said was Kimla Rochav Hasit Kaful, the width of 2 sits, which we explained was the distance between the pointer and the index finger. What's going on? What's the question? Sorry, folks. Yeah. All right, sorry, folks. Well, whenever our Gemara comes back to us. Here, okay. So what is the amount the Mishnah says that you're chayiv for, you're liable for? And the answer, the Gemara says, is the distance between the pointer and the middle finger, the index finger, and the middle finger. Rabbi Yosef machve kaful. Rabbi Yosef, in regards to this discussion, showed the size of a pool, which is Rashi. Hi hasit kaful de masnisin kaful mamish. He says, do this twice, and that's the size. Oh, you probably have a hard time seeing me because of my backdrop. As if this. Oh. Bear with me, folks. All right. So this size twice. Rav Chia bar Ami machve pashat. Rav Chia bar Ami showed the same distance, but instead of saying this times 2, he just showed a single distance that made that amount. How did he do that? Let's see. Rabbi Steinsaltz here. He demonstrated it in a simple matter. He calculated the distance between the thumb and the forefinger to be double this. Thumb and forefinger. Anyways, he found, oh no, like this, right? He found his own way to show the same distance. Just instead of saying this times 2, he showed one single motion. Rashi, Pashut, the distance between the thumb and the index finger, Pam echad once, who kaful. It's like twice this. So, anyways, 2 different ways to convey the same measurement. That's the Gemara. That's the story. Now we're on to the next Mishnah. This was a very technical discussion about how a person might experience the same distance or measure the same distance with 2 different tools, 2 different paradigms that ultimately convey the very same message. And now it's time to start a new Mishnah. Thank you all for being here for this special moment. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Rabbi Yehuda taught Hatzad. Okay, so now we're moving on to a new malacha. So let's think. We've covered a lot of malachas this last while. Boina, soiser, makeh bepatish, right? Building, destruction, demolition. Makeh bepatish, finishing off a work process. Weaving, different steps of weaving. What else did we say? Tearing, stitching. What am I missing? I'm missing a bunch. Writing, erasing. Any others? Weaving. Anyways, a whole bunch of different malachas. And now we're moving on to another prohibited act on Shabbos, namely the prohibition of trapping. Now, in a sense, with the exception of Alan Aryan, who's our outdoorsman, actually, I take that back. Dr. Pasternak also has a lot of outdoor experience. Maybe others do that I don't know about. But I am not so familiar with the art of trapping and hunting. But once upon a time, it was a very essential part of human existence and subsistence, not only for an outdoor person, but if you just wanted to have a little protein in your diet, well, unless you were raising cattle, which was another option, you might find yourself trapping. Now, for a Jew, you have a little bit, you have fewer options because the animal needs to be prepared in accordance to Jewish ritual prescriptions of shechita. So you need to trap the animal while keeping it alive. But remember, there are other types of trapping too. Like you might want to trap some bees that are bothering your sukkah, or a beetle or a bug or whatever else. But the Mishnah is going to talk about the primary, more common types of trapping that would happen in that time. So let's take a look. Rabbi Yehuda teaches about trapping. Hatzad Sipur. When has a person committed the act of trapping a bird? I'm sorry. Hatzad Sipur lemigdal. If you trap a bird in a closet, says Rabbi Steinsaltz. Rashi. Ad shechnisu lemigdal mishtar belas chayev dezu hitzei dasan. So here's what Rashi explains. You want to trap a bird? Well, let me ask you this. If a bird is in your house, have you trapped the bird? Well, I'll tell you this. I've been in a number of airports in my lifetime, and a number of occasions I've seen birds flying around the airport. I don't know if you've seen that, but I have. I'll tell you something else. When I was in yeshiva in Israel, in Kfar Chabad, and other yeshivas too, but Kfar Chabad had, if I recall, a relatively high ceiling. And every once in a while, a bunch of birds would end up flying around in the base medrash. Now, there are reasons why you'd prefer not to have birds flying around the base medrash, and it doesn't take a lot of creativity to imagine why you don't necessarily want to have birds flying overhead, but that's life. Those birds were as free as you could imagine. Just because they're flying around the airport or they're flying around your base medrash, that does not mean that they are trapped. As Rashi points out, they can simply fly out the window or otherwise evade capturing until their opportunity to escape. So just because you have a bird in your home, in a building, that's not enough. But if you have it in a closet, If you had it, have it in a more confined space, Rabbi Steinsaltz adds in the word cage. And the commentaries add over here that we're talking about that you made an effort to get the animal into that closet. So let's say you placed inside of it, how do you call it? Some kind of food or other kind of way to attract the bird's attention, and then you slam the door shut. So then you've trapped the bird. But what about a deer? If you manage to get a deer into your house, utzvila bayit, well, first of all, good luck on anything that's not child-proof is probably not deer-proof. So you're going to be looking at a lot of damage. But once the deer is in your house, it is game over for your deer. Says Rabbi Yehuda. Tzvila bayit chayav. Rashi, tzvi, nitzod. Mishnichinitu lebeito. When you got the deer into your house, v'nal b'fanav, and then you lock the door. Well, now it is certainly trapped. But just because the deer entered into your garden, into a courtyard where it has ample avenues for escaping, Rabbi Yehuda will tell us this is not considered trapped. So every animal, every creature has its own moment that would be described as trapped. Chachamim omrim, the sages, however, disagree and say as follows. Tzipor lamigdal. Indeed, a bird is considered trapped when it's inside of a closet, some kind of cage. But tzvi, legina, v'lechatzer, v'labevarin. A deer is considered trapped when it's in a garden or a courtyard or in other kind of enclosure.
Rabbi?
So, hold on one second. So the Chachamim have a more lenient perspective on what is the definition of having trapped a deer. Rebero b'vakasha, yes.
Is it my imagination, or did we have a discussion similar somewhere about animals, etc., trapped inside?
We may have referenced it in the past. Shalom, you want to get a lot of pictures of the process? We may have referenced it in the past, but this is the primary discussion. This is the Mishnah. And this is where the primary discussion is going to be. But you're right, we have referenced this in the past. And Baruch Hashem, at the close of the Masechah Shabbat, we will have referenced most of the malachas multiple times, either in primary or secondary discussion, comparison, and analysis. So thank you, Reb Beryl, for remembering.
I'm just thinking if I'm ready for the home or not.
Don't bring a deer. Lamer would not appreciate a deer in your home or in the lobby for that matter.
It could be trapped in the elevator. Bernie's gone anyway.
If they trapped in the elevator, that would not be good. So opinion number one, Rabbi Yehuda seems to be the most restrictive. It's only trapped if it's in the house. The Chachamim say, even if it's trapped in an enclosure, although you may have to do another step or two to actually secure the deer. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says, we got to have a more nuanced perspective. Lokol habebarin shavin. Not every kind of enclosure is identical. Zehaklal, let's work more with a general rule of thumb than a specific term. Mechusar tzeida, if the animal needs to yet be trapped, patur, well then it hasn't been trapped. But if it does not have another necessary step to secure it, chayav, then you've already trapped it. Rashi. And so certain enclosures don't give the animal much of a route or an avenue for escape. Other enclosures, the animal is as good as trapped. Hold on one second. Let's do this. Bibar. So let's see in the dictionary here. From Latin, vivarium. Alan, you know what a vivarium is? Anyone here studied Latin?
No clue.
Well, I'll tell you, in Hebrew, bivar today is used, it's not the colloquial, but it's used as a zoo.
Ah, okay. So what is a vivarium? Okay, apparently it's a movie that's gonna going to take up most of the initial searches. So we'll go to here. A vivarium is an enclosure in which live game, fish, and beasts are kept. So not very much unlike either a zoo or probably a little more than a zoo, probably more like what we might call, in Florida, we have lion country safari where they're having animals that aren't trapped, but they're in more of a habitat-like environment. I remember when I was in Wisconsin, they had like a wildlife sanctuary. It was called the Shalom.
Like a fish farm today with the ponds.
Yeah, or today you fought, yeah. And so an animal can be brought into a vivarium. It's trapped in that it cannot go wherever it pleases, but for the purposes of you actually doing what you want with it, the animal is not necessarily trapped. And Rebel, you are correct. Here we're quoting a Mishnah that says, Ein sadin dagim min abibarim. And indeed, I think it's usually more in the context of fish. And so, no. So anyways, there we have it. Vivarium. I'm still curious to see what Google's going to do for us. No, that's not what I wanted.
I have a cute story about a vivarium.
Okay, I thought you didn't know what a vivarium is.
Well, I looked it up.
Okay, go ahead.
We were sitting in South Africa in the lobby of a hotel, and my wife Karen is sitting in an armchair and having a coffee and eating a biscuit. And a monkey jumped from the rafters up on the ceiling, right onto the armchair, grabbed her biscuit, and sat beside her and ate it.
That must have been very exciting.
And I was sitting opposite her with a camera in my hand, playing with the camera, and I saw that, and I took a picture of it.
Okay, that I hope you submitted it to National Geographic or something.
When I get home, I'll send it to you.
Okay, fantastic. Put it on the group. Put it on the WhatsApp group.
So here's a definition if you want.
Go ahead.
A vivarium literally means a container, often with a glass front, in which small animals, especially small reptiles, are kept as pets or so that they can be studied.
So today we would call that like not an aquarium, but like but something like that, right?
Vivarium.
But is that in English? I've never used it in conversation. I've never before used the word vivarium. Have you?
In Russian, vivarium means specifically a container for snakes.
Interesting. So in Russian, the vivarium means this general idea, but it's specific for snakes. Very interesting. And now that you mention
the whole Russia might be a vivarium. But
hold on, but now that you mention it, I'm trying to think because in the Prospect Park Zoo, I'm trying to remember if they use the word vivarium in any context. So anyways,
reptilian.
So there we go. So bottom line is like this. This was a word that's in the Mishnah, but it also etymologically is embraced probably because of the common Latin or Greek origin in many languages. And so this is very interesting. And so there, Rebel, we get a little linguistics in the Talmud discussion. In addition,
no limit.
All right, here we go. Again, Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says, not every vivarium is the same. Some vivariums are small and contain your snakes. Others are more like what we would call in America for marketing purposes, an enclosed safari, which just means a zoo, which gives the animals a little more place than typical zoos. And the principle, the rule of thumb is if it's like a little cage, well, then the animal's already been trapped. But if Alon, אנחנו משלמים להם יפה שהם יעשו את העבודה. אני לא רוצה לעצבן אותם. All right. So anyways, that's the Mishnah.
Say hello to Alon. Tell him I say hello.
Rabbi, it's an interesting situation because today, like in Singapore, the zoos have no cages.
So the people have cages? Interesting. So some zoos, right? You put the people in the cages and the animals in the wild.
Shark Tank.
Yeah. All right, let's see the Gemara. So there we have a Mishnah, interesting Mishnah, talking about the art. Okay, I said the art of trapping. But here we look at trapping as a melacha. It is a prescribed, prohibited activity on Shabbos. And what is the threshold that a person would now have to say, "Oi, I did trapping, I did sad on Shabbos, and therefore, if it was unintentionally, it needs to be done. Has to bring a carbon, etc., etc." Three opinions. Rabbi Yehuda seems to have the most narrow and defined perspective. The Chachamim give a little more flexibility for when a tzvi. Hold on. Oof.
Rabbi, I don't want to belabor the point, but you have
Hold on, Beryl, unmute yourself again. Just there was some funny sound. Go.
another interesting situation. What if that happens and your intention is to let the animal out after Shabbos?
That's an interesting question. Let's see if the Gemara gives us any further input on the topic, because it's a good question and I'm not fully certain. Let's see. So the Gemara now goes on. We turn now to page 160. Tananos, there is a companion Mishnah in Masechet Beitza. Ein sadin dagim and abebarim b'yom tov. One is not permitted to trap, I imagine, with a net, fish out of a Bavarium on the holiday on Yontif. They noise them with name nor does one provide food for them. But one is permitted to trap chaya, an animal, the oif, birds, ostensibly to shech them, to eat them. And you can feed them. So what do we see here on Yontif? So what's unique about what is an important distinction between Yontif and Shabbos is that on Shabbos on Yontif you are allowed to do things that are tzorech ochel nefesh. You're allowed to eat. But there are issues of muktzah. Things that are totally out of your world, nolad, you're not allowed to use them and you're not allowed to interact with them. And so our Gemara now is introducing this Mishnah to try to really consider the definition of something being trapped. So the Mishnah says, don't trap fish out of a Bavarian, but you can trap chaya v'oif. Why can you trap the animals? Because ostensibly they are already available to you in the Bavarian. But there's a contradicting text. I suppose this is a brisa that says you're not allowed to feed. You're not allowed to trap any kind of animal in Yontif from a Bavarian. And you cannot feed them. Kashya chaya chaya, kashya oifes haoifes. You have a Mishnah in Beya that says you're allowed to trap animals and birds, and in a brisa that says you're not allowed to. You're not allowed to trap them. You're not allowed to feed them because they are muktzah. So the Gemara says no. Bishleim chaya chaya like kasha. As the debate pertains, as the machlokes pertains to the wild the animals, it's not a contradiction, the Mishnah and the Brisa. You know why? Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbanan. One could reflect the perspective of Rabbi Yehuda, and one could reflect the perspective of Rabbanan. When the Mishnah says Ein Sadim, that reflects the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, who says that you did not capture or trap a deer until it's in a home, until it's in a little structure. In a broader enclosure, it's not trapped. So reflecting the viewpoint of our Mishnah that says that you have to actually have the deer in your home, but in a Bavarium it is not trapped. That's why the Mishnah in Beya says that you may not trap them because you don't already have a handle on them. I just lost the place. And the oifes kasha, but what's the deal with the birds? Why does one text say that you're allowed to trap birds? The other text says that you are not allowed to trap birds. Maybe we'll give another explanation about birds, because let's pause for a moment. Rebero, help me out. What is the difference practically between a trapped deer or a chaya and a trapped bird? Can you think of any difference?
None.
I'll tell you a distinction.
In size.
Well, not only that, but a chaya, a wild animal, as long as the walls are high enough, the moat could contain them. But try to lock a bird up behind a high wall. You know what birds do with walls? They fly over them.
Same as the southern border.
Yeah. So therefore, maybe we'll try to say, ha bevar mikora, ha bevar shein mikora. When we say that birds are considered trapped, it's because there's a roof. They can't escape. But if there's no roof, birds are as good as free. That's not going to work. You know why? Bias to mikora, who a house has a roof on it, and everybody agrees that the bird needs to be in a cage. It can't be in a house. Sipor lemidal in the bias law. Amar Rabba Bar Huna explains the reason why we said that a bird specifically needs to have a house is because certain birds are rebellious. They will never be trapped, and other birds are more inclined to being contained. We're going to go a little further on the discussion of the drawer, but out of respect for our esteemed Kehila on the Zoom, and because of the extensive noise that is happening and is going to be progressively more intense behind us, I'm going to draw our discussion to a close just 4 minutes early. I want to thank our dear scholars, members of this Chabura, for joining to ensure that we can study the Gemara in a meaningful, deep, rich, and diversified way. And I look forward to learning with everyone tomorrow, Be'ezer Hashem. And thank you all so much. Let's hope for continued good news, healthy news, happy news for all of Klal Yisrael. Yasher Koach. In case you're wondering what the noise behind us is, we are installing, with Hashem's help, a projector and a screen and some sounds over here. And the good news is that they're being installed now so that we can have our shiurim that take place in person and our videos. But when we, God willing, move from here to the next stage in our journey towards our new shul, we'll be able to take it with us with Hashem's help. And so this is an exciting little step in a good direction, but it is a little noisy. So thank you all. Have a wonderful day, and the Yasher Koach.
Destruction before construction.
This is construction before destruction for more construction. So that's Hashem's help. Yasher Koach.